Hey friends, this is day 20 of Russian war against Ukraine. Globally speaking, not a lot is going on militarily. The troops are not advancing. They cannot. They have petered out. They don't have resources anymore. While Russia is looking for a way to resupply their troops, to reinforce their troops and find supplies, maybe from Russia, maybe from China, maybe from the Middle East. They're still launching missiles into Mariupol, which is the worst, being hit worst, into Kiev and into Kharkiv, hoping to take those cities, blockade them, encircle them. In Mariupol, they're having success doing that. It's blockaded, and there's been some green corridors open there, but of course as maybe 50, 100 cars go through, they start shooting again to close them. Of course, this is a tactic of terrorizing civilians. Third round of negotiations happened today, and they broke for a technical pause, they call it. But the negotiations are not happening around major topics like ceasefire, capitulation, or anything like that. It's only around the green corridors and when they could be open and stuff like that, because it looks like a stalemate at this point, and Russia cannot move forward. They're looking for ways to advance. It looks like China had said no. Many other countries had said no. The fighters from Syria, they're not going to do a lot of damage. They're not motivated. They're not being paid well. So it could actually turn bad for Russia. As we talked about, the stalemate could mean a couple of things. One, that Moscow will be more willing to come to the negotiating table, but also it could mean that things will happen much worse. Depends on what kind of a day Putin is having, and if he's completely off his rocker, which in the worst case scenario, he might start doing even more atrocities, stuff like we're seeing in Mariupol right now, or even by summer, as one of the analysts is predicting, he's going to start threatening nuclear annihilation for the West if they do not remove the sanctions that they have imposed on Russia. So that remains to be seen, but of course, the West needs to be more decisive and nip this thing in the bud before he goes completely off rails in this situation. Okay, so a couple of important things to talk about. Maybe you have seen the video of one of the editors of the first channel. Her name is Marina Ovsyannikova. Live on air, she came out behind the anchor with a poster that said, "No war, don't listen to propaganda, and they are lying to you." It may seem like either a prank or one person's protest, but actually it has a lot more effect. A couple of things we have to understand about the first channel number one in Russia. It's not like in the United States where you have a few big channels and they're sort of rivaling each other. So for example, people who watch Fox don't like people who watch MSNBC and vice versa. There's some parity, there's some competition there. In Russia, there's no competition. In Russia, as of last week, all the independent channels, which were tiny as they were, ceased to exist. So Echo Moskvy, a channel called Dozhd, which means rain, those have been closed because there was a law passed that you cannot talk about the war as the war. You cannot talk about Russia as the aggressor and stuff like that. So those have ceased to exist. But even without that, there's only a handful of government channels, and channel number one had the most reach, had the most spread, had the most preferences in the airspace of Russia. So this is the channel everybody watches. The protest, Marina Ovsyannikova protested during a program called Vremya. And Vremya is a program that has been there for decades because this is the legacy of Soviet Union. I remember when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, 8 p.m. this program would come on and everybody would watch it. More so, our sources are telling us that this is Vladimir Putin's favorite program. No matter where he is, no matter what he's doing, he always watches this program. So even when he's flying, even if he's in the car, This is his favorite program. He never misses it. So for an editor like that, Marina Ovsyannikova, to come out and protest live on air on the biggest channel in the in Russia that Putin watches, this is huge. It's not just a prank. It's not just one person's opinion. This is a subversion of the system, because Putin saw this 100%. So after this happened, nobody saw Ovsyannikova for, I think, 10 hours. I'm not sure whether they know where she is right now. So usually we can extrapolate what happened to her, but what usually happens to people like this is she was picked up by FSB, which is CIA equivalent in Russia, and they're trying to discredit her. They will try to say, well, she's nuts. She did not mean what she did. She's off her meds, off her rock, or whatever. That would be strategy number one. Or strategy number two, if they can break her, she will come out publicly and say, I was recruited by Americans, I was recruited by Ukrainians to do this. I didn't really want to do it, but they threatened my family, so I just had to do it. So they are going to try to make her either look insane or coerced. And the reason behind that is that because they cannot allow for people of Russia to realize how many are there of them who oppose the war, who understand that this is propaganda, who understand that they're lying to you. Two important things I think come out from here. Number one is what I already mentioned. It's people are looking at this and they're realizing, maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe I'm not that isolated. And we're seeing that in totalitarian regimes, this is a big thing. They want you to feel isolated, like you're the only one who's against it, like you're the only one who doesn't agree with what they're doing. So it's important for these internal Russian agencies to keep people who want to think for themselves and think clearly, to think that they're the only ones. So what Marina did here is that she showed that you're not the only one. She showed to the entire nation, to the entire population who watches Programu Vremya, which is translated as time, that there is people even on the first channel who oppose this regime. Number two, it's highly symbolic what she did, because the screenshots that you see, and I encourage you to Google this, I encourage you to go on YouTube and see what's happening. The image in your mind is this Russian anchor, Ekaterina, something her name was. I remember her from the 90s, like when I was a kid. So this anchor, and behind her is this poster of "They are lying to you." So now the mental image, the cognitive image that you see is that the first channel anchor and they're lying to you. So this is very important. This is very important for Russian people to understand. And number two is that would be number three, is that we're living in an informational age, which means that people can get information from anywhere they want. By the way, Russia has banned Instagram and Facebook at this point, which they're trying to control the means of publishing. Like Lenin did that, but by the way, the first thing he did was issued a directive is to seize the publishing. So this is what they're trying to do. Russia is to control the publishing. And maybe you've heard this opinion that if there was internet in the 30s, World War II would never happen. Turns out to be a progressive bullshit, of course, because it's not that people don't have access to information, it's that they live in echo chambers and they only listen to the information that already confirms their bias. So even though Russians, all this time, since 2014, for 8 years, they could have been looking at various sources of information, Ukrainian, Western source of information, and realize what's happening, realize that they're being the aggressor, realize that these independent republics are nothing but shills for Russian government, but they chose not to, because they only listen to in their echo chamber. So why Marina's protest was so heroic is because within the echo chamber of Russia, she showed that things are not well. They are lying to you. So people who trust the first channel have now doubt in their mind. They're now thinking, well, if people who work at channel number one are revolting, something must be happening, and the regime is starting to crumble. I've heard one of the analysts compare it to a small hole in a dam. So if you, for example, imagine a Hoover Dam, this huge wall, and if you make a little hole in it, which is comparable to what Marina did here, things might start to unravel really fast, which is why FSB has reacted to what she did so strongly. They took her away, no lawyers present, they tried to break her, and we don't know what will happen, but because they were trying to mend that little hole, because that little hole will give cracks into entire dam and wash the entire lying machine, the propaganda machine, out. So that seemed like maybe a small insignificant thing that she did, but in reality I think it's big, and I think she's a hero for doing that. Her father is Ukrainian, she has 2 kids living in Russia with her, so this is nothing short of heroic. So hopefully she will come out fine after this, and before they can do anything to her, Russian regime will crumble. I should say Putin's regime, not Russian regime. Russians deserve to live in peace and prosperity. Okay, so another thing is that I've been listening to a few reports by the spokesman for Ukrainian defense, Alexei Arestovich. He also is a advisor to the president, as you remember, and he is hinting that today, on day 20, on Tuesday, have been some really successful counterattacks in 2 directions, in Kyiv and Kharkiv. He's saying that official information is to follow, but they have been able to turn things around in these 2 key cities. So that's great. We'll see what comes out, but he was really optimistic. He also said that during the time of the war, 83 airplanes, fighters, bombers, and so on, have been shot down. 83, which is pretty impressive. China announced a new wave of COVID, and by this time, I'm not sure what your opinion of COVID is, but it's over. It's effectively over. Since the war in Ukraine started, a new news cycle started. COVID has not been a thing at all. So what I'm seeing in this is that China is using COVID as a pretense not to help Russia. It's basically a big middle finger to Russia. They're saying, we have a new wave of COVID, we cannot get involved, we have to take care of our own internal market. So I interpret it as that, because yesterday and today this was a whole big thing, is what's China going to do, and China has their own calculations, because they're looking at Taiwan. 75% of their economy is depending on outside sources, and by the way, we have known this for a while. I've had a few friends who had lived in China for a number of years, and what they tell me is the same thing. Every child in China wants to be in international relationships or international trade. So for example, if you ask your kid who you want to be, they'll probably want to be like an astronaut or superhero, whatever. In China, kids want to be in international trade. So we know that this has been China's policy. Their power has always been soft power. They've been doing huge infrastructure projects in Africa and even in Ukraine. So we know that this is not their style. So realistically, I don't think they are going to help Russia. Maybe with that food supplies for their troops, maybe that, but it's not in their style to go in full military confrontation. And then finally, the news that I read maybe an hour ago is that Putin had signed into a law that it's legal to seize the leased planes from international companies. So as you know, many airlines, the way they work is they do not own their own planes. They lease their planes from leasing companies, and which is why 3-4 weeks ago there was a big thing about flying into Ukraine. When I was trying to fly in, I had to change my flight twice, is because the insurance companies could not insure planes flying into Ukraine. So now, with the full weight of economic sanctions, Russia understands that they don't have any of their own planes. So whichever planes have been downed have been landed in Russia and are currently physically on Russian Federation territory. Putin says that airlines can now seize those companies, steal them, which basically means steal them. So that's another move that we're seeing, Russia isolating themselves, because what else are they going to do? They cannot even do any internal flights because they don't have any of their own planes. So we see that Russia is being isolated more and more. The sanctions are having their weight, and this is wonderful because these sanctions have an effect of bringing people to their senses, or in this case, falling off rails even further. Okay, so that's what's happening. We're sort of in watchful waiting what's going to happen on the military front, because these things, everything else, the outcome of the war, peace negotiations, humanitarian crisis, that's being decided on the battlefield, because whatever happens there gets reflected in everything else. And hopefully, as Aristovich says, that by mid-April, Russia will have nothing to fight with, and no supplies, no allies, and they will be a lot more lenient in their negotiating tactics. And Ukraine will not take anything less but full retreat of Russian army into their territory, full return of our territories, which is the eastern Ukraine, but also Crimea in the south. And with every day passing and with every success of Ukrainian army, it does not seem like a very remote possibility. Friends, I thank you for your support and your shares and your likes and your messages to me. It's very encouraging to know that I have friends in the West and in the East, and that we as Ukrainians are not in this fight alone. I'll talk to you tomorrow.